Interesting. I hope somebody changes the name of that village for the better. Now, domestic versus external loans meant to finance the national budget will be restructured to a 23-27 ratio. And this, of course, is to reduce the external borrowing rates, which burdens the country with expensive dollar-denominated loans that force supplementary budget adjustments in the long run. Budget and Appropriation Committee Chair Ndindi Nyoro says that already the government has slashed the budget approximates for the next fiscal year by 100 billion shillings as it works on stabilizing the shilling for more favorable repayment terms with international financiers. However, what's the assurance that the continued volatility of the currency currently will be tamed? Does the government have a better plan than waiting for remittance inflow? Hibak Saeed tells us more.
A hefty budget of 4.134 trillion shillings. The government arms itself with quote-unquote fiscal consolidation plans for what it calls a manageable and modest budget. But in perspective, the budget estimates have grown from last year's 3.3 trillion, the budget deficit forecast for the financial year standing at 5.5% of GDP from last year's hiked 5.3%.
That is quite modest, and it's quite manageable, and especially if you look at our peers, both in the emerging economies and in the developing economies and all the economies in the southern part. And therefore, this is very commendable that we are continuing to lessen our appetite for debt budgeting, and eventually, I am sure at some point, we will be able to read a balanced budget where we rely squarely on our resources.
But what does this truly mean for the Kenyan taxpayer? For one, this adds pressure to the tax collector, who has to raise additional funds to cover 2.9 trillion shillings of the national budget, the same revenue authority that has recently fallen short for this cycle.
At the end of it, when you compare what is being projected and probably what was realized or achieved in the previous financial year, we find huge gaps. And that is one of the reasons for pending bills.
To cover the deficit of about 700 billion shillings, this would also mean additional borrowing locally and internationally, adding to the already ballooning debt owed by the country.
But we are trying to moderate because we are working against a deficit that is we must look and work against.
However, the committee assigned to appropriate and preside over the budget-making process say there are austerity measures in place to tame the debt owed, all the while widening the revenue collection net. And as for the plans to stabilize the Kenyan shilling through foreign remittance,
the current shilling is around 1.146 or thereabout. In my estimation, the shilling may gain further.
Now the budget approximation stands at around 4.1 trillion shillings. This as the Budget and Appropriation Committee says that it has slashed around 100 billion shillings from the deficit, and health and immigration stand as the biggest winners of Budget 2024-2025. Hibak Saeed for TV 47 Machakos.